Sometimes, the dialogue in MCU projects is so good that it hurts.
But what is grief, if not love persevering?
And other times, the writing hurts for a completely different reason.
You and Banner better not be playing hide the zucchini.
In the latest Captain America movie, the specific reason is that the screenplay thinks you're an idiot.
My brain is better than everybody's!
See, one of the most basic rules of screenwriting is show, don't tell. This basically means that good screenwriters communicate through evocative visuals and subtext, rather than having the dialogue directly tell the audience what to think and feel.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Sure, you can break basic rules if you're talented, but the screenplay for Brave New World is not a transgressive masterpiece. It's a fundamental failure of storytelling. That's why today, we'll be examining a bunch of the bad writing found throughout the narrative, analyzing why it's unnecessary, and offering up less condescending ways to communicate with your audience. I'm Dylan, and this is The Writer's Block.
Heard anything from Betty, from my daughter?
This is like the second line of dialogue in the movie, and it's already guilty of awkward exposition. In universe, this woman works for Thaddeus Ross, and should know who he's talking about when he says Betty. Having to clarify that it's his daughter doesn't really make any sense, and is clearly for the benefit of the audience. But even for viewers that don't remember the 2008 Hulk movie, this clarification is useless for several reasons. First of all, we can use a little thing called context clues. He's about to give an important speech, but the main thing on his mind is someone named Betty. Clearly, Betty is important to him, and more than likely a family member. Secondly, if they think so little of the audience's intelligence, there's an easy way to make this dialogue less awkward. Just cut out the first half and have him ask,
Heard anything from my daughter?
In a show like The West Wing, President Bartlett has 3 daughters, so first names are actually needed. But President Ross only has 1 child, so daughter would tell us everything that we need to know. And what makes this also much worse is that the very next scene is a newsfeed exposition dump.
It also resulted in the president-elect's estrangement from his daughter, Dr. Betty Ross.
You don't need to tell us this twice. Just pick one awkward vehicle for exposition and let the other scene play out more naturally. Next, I want to look at just how poorly the opening action sequence is handled. From a writing standpoint, this whole set piece feels flat because we're told the stakes but never shown them. Information is delivered explicitly through dialogue.
Well, Serpent mercenaries entered with a package about an hour ago. Serpent's getting farther away with the canister, Sam. Sam, package is secured.
But we don't see this dramatized on screen in a way that engages the audience.
Damn. Nobody saw that.
The movie is trying to explain what's going on, but doing it simultaneously with the action, and specifically instead of showing the action, saps the conflict of any urgency. It feels like things are on autopilot, and only happening because the story needs it to. An easy way to fix this is by taking a play out of Fanboy's other big blockbuster, Top Gun Maverick.
What the hell kind of mission is this?
In that movie, we get multiple briefings that explicitly lay out what the mission objective is,
The Pentagon has tasked us with assembling a strike team and taking it out.
and why it's so difficult.
Time is your greatest enemy.
This means that when we actually get to the action sequences, we know whether or not they're making progress towards their goal.
Bullseye, holy
Nice.
And we react more viscerally when they face a major setback.
Dagger 1 is hit! I repeat, Dagger 1 is hit! Maverick is down!
Now, imagine if they did this for Brave New World. Not only would it allow the audience to understand the action sequences without constantly interrupting it, but it would also give them a chance to set up the characters. Joaquin could have a hard time paying attention to the briefing because he's so excited to go on the mission, which would also set up his accident later on in the narrative. Sam could be quiet and in his head because this is one of his first missions as the official Captain America. His main conflict in Falcon and the Winter Soldier was whether or not he was worthy, and this would be a great way to set up that he still feels the need to prove himself. The other main problem, besides lack of setup, is that they don't create drama within the narrative beats of the action sequence. So how can we fix that?
Sam, SEAL team is 6 minutes out.
Copy that!
Instead of just saying this for the sake of exposition, this should have been used as an unexpected problem. If we saw something unexpectedly delay the SEAL team, this could force Sam to improvise and go in alone. He could feel added pressure weighing on him because suddenly he has to complete the mission by himself.
How the hell did he just do that?
Cap's gear was a gift from the Wakandans for helping him out.
Both this line and the accompanying action beat wind up feeling like a cheap callback to the Disney Plus show because it doesn't actually do anything for the character. An easy way to add depth would be if Sam was was getting overwhelmed using only the shield, prompting Joaquin to remind him that his suit has Wakandan technology. Seeing Sam forget aspects of his toolkit would humanize him and remind us that he's new to being Captain America, and seeing Joaquin remind him of this would show the audience that they're a good team.
Joaquin, Red Wing's picking up hostages inside.
If you're gonna bring up hostages in an action sequence, they should significantly alter how your heroes execute their plan. Sam doesn't even sound all that worried when he delivers the line, so what drama do the hostages add? If the answer is none, why include them at all?
That's Sidewinder, he's the head of Serpent. He's not supposed to be here.
Once again, this movie absolutely botches introducing characters to the audience. Unless you're playing it for laughs, a villain entrance should almost always have gravitas. If you have to tell the audience directly that the character is important, you're not doing a good job. An easy way to fix this would have been if Sam was shocked when Sidewinder turns around and reveals his identity.
What are you doing here?
He could then tell Joaquin to order the SEAL team not to engage, because Sidewinder always has a trick up his sleeve. This would clearly communicate that his presence is both unexpected and a major threat. But if the heroes aren't even intimidated by the villain, what reason is there for the audience to take them seriously? Speaking of lame villains,
Where'd your rib go? You need a minute?
first of all, the fact that he says this, but the audience doesn't hear Sam's rib break, is a complete failure of sound design. That's an incredibly simple Foley effect to add in post, and would have sold the injury better than any line of dialogue. Additionally, the fact that Sam is almost completely unfazed by the injury robs the scene of any tension. Part of what makes the Tom Cruise roof jump such a great moment is that we see the character struggle to walk away after making it across. He can be injured, which means he's human, which means we can relate to him. The choice to persevere past an injury is always more compelling than not getting injured at all. And it's for that same reason that this is the best line of dialogue in Rise of Skywalker. But Sam Wilson continues to fight like a martial artist in perfect health. It's just one example, but it exemplifies how this movie is allergic to meaningful complications. Oh, and I almost forgot about this conversation.
Serpent's getting farther away with the canister, Sam. I already know what you're trying to do. You can't be at two places at once.
All right, this time.
No dying, copy that.
Now, Joaquin's dialogue in this scene is great. It shows that he's eager to join in on the action, and that he enjoys being Sam's sidekick. But Sam's dialogue doesn't make sense for where the narrative winds up going. See, the Act 2 low point is when Joaquin joins Falcon on a combat mission, but gets too cocky and winds up nearly dying.
Joaquin!
And after this happens, Sam winds up blaming himself.
They don't know this isn't your fault.
But for this to make sense, they needed to make one of two changes. Either A, Sam is vehemently against Joaquin taking risks and jumping into the action, which would make the low point a confirmation of his worst fears. Or B, Sam heavily encourages Joaquin to step up and become a hero, making him feel directly responsible for Joaquin's near-death experience. The problem with how they characterize Sam in this intro is that it's too neutral to create meaningful drama. Sure, he seems a little hesitant.
All right, this time.
But don't get yourself killed.
But he also laughs it off and gives Joaquin the go-ahead. Like the entire movie, his dialogue here doesn't capture any real emotion, which means the audience has no reason to be invested. You know how I mentioned the importance of show don't tell? Well, apparently this movie thinks that means you should just show the movie's theme written out on a tombstone.
Keep your face always to the sunshine, and the shadows will fall behind you.
Now, this is a perfectly decent theme for a movie. It essentially means that if you're brave enough to try your best and hope for a better tomorrow, that your shortcomings won't end up defining you. But normally, a technique as on the nose as this is saved for the end of a movie rather than in the first 12 minutes. Additionally, the way this scene explores this theme is incredibly awkward. After reciting the message out loud for the audience members that don't know how to read, Ross then explains to his security guard,
The quote was Betty's idea.
prompting her to awkwardly ask,
She's still not speaking with you?
Ross then says no and explains,
She doesn't believe I've changed. Really changed.
Now, this technically does explore the theme set up by the tombstone, but it does so in a way that is robotic and devoid of any emotion. Imagine if instead, the scene began with Ross standing by the tombstone, trying to call his daughter, but getting sent to voicemail. He starts off being sincere, talking about how proud Betty's mom would be of her, and how proud he is to be her dad. But when he feels too emotional, he gets frustrated and hangs up. Then, to break the tension, his bodyguard could say that she likes the inscription on the tombstone, prompting Ross to tell her that it was a saying Betty always believed, but that he's not sure how he feels about it anymore. This would dramatize Ross's self-doubt, rather than focusing on the opinion of a character who's barely in the movie.
Coming up on the end of my first 100 days, Layla. This treaty's gotta work.
Once again, this technically ties into the theme of the movie, but all the audience notices is the awkward exposition. Harrison Ford sounds like he's talking directly to the audience.
They're gonna define me.
Rather than Layla or himself. But if you change the dialogue to say something like, "I've made a lot of mistakes, Layla. How do I know if one good thing is enough to set it right?" And Layla tells him, "Don't worry, sir, the treaty is going to work." All of a sudden, you have multiple things happening at once. Not only do we make the exposition more natural and reveal that there's an important treaty happening soon, but it also introduces compelling ambiguity. Is Ross talking about mistakes made in his career or as a parent? And is the one good thing getting the treaty passed?
And the treaty says,
I say.
Or is it making amends with his daughter?
You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster?
That type of ambiguity would make his character arc much more compelling because it creates internal conflict. The more he focuses on his presidency, the farther he is from reconnecting with Betty, which means there would be emotional stakes tied to the main conflict, rather than it feeling like random action figure nonsense. So I don't know if Mr. Statistics is the worst villain in an MCU movie, but he's definitely the most boring.
Please don't be boring.
And this is for one simple reason. Despite the fact that his only character trait is being smart,
My mind sees it all, every probable outcome.
the writing in this movie isn't.
maybe you're not as smart as you think you are.
They want you to feel like he's always one step ahead of the heroes, and by extension the audience, but the audience can see what's coming from a mile away.
I see what's happening, yeah.
So instead of trying to trick the audience, the screenplay just makes the characters kind of stupid. Then, every time President Ross or Captain America makes a dumb decision, the bad guy just goes, "Ah, just as I predicted. There was a 90% chance that you'd do that thing that you just did, because the screenplay told you to." Then, when his genius plan gets foiled not once, but twice, he suddenly moves the goalpost and says this.
All you heroes protecting this world, we'll see what happens when you have to protect this place from the others.
Like, imagine losing so badly that your only response is to foreshadow an Avengers film you aren't going to be asked to come back for. Anyways, it's obvious that the screenplay didn't have the juice to make him an intelligent villain, but was his master plan compelling at least? After all, Thanos' grand plan is objectively pretty dumb, but the screenplays for Infinity War and Endgame still get you to invest emotionally.
What did it cost?
Everything.
Well, the main problem with Booger Brain's scheme is that it revolves around a misunderstanding of President Ross.
Everyone will know just who you are, and Betty will despise you even more.
This movie wants you to think that rage is a key component of Thunderbolt Ross's character.
The rage. Why don't you just let it out?
But at least in the MCU, he's not driven by rage, but rather obsession. He hunts down the Hulk because Bruce Banner is his white whale, and he pushes the Sokovia Accords because he thinks it will make the world a better place. He wants to control the world around him, not smash it to pieces. What bums me out is that we even hint at a better approach to this storyline at the end of the movie. Just before Ross turns into the Red Hulk, the villain tells Sam,
Ross turned me into a monster. It's only right that I do the same thing to him.
Imagine if instead of focusing on Ross's rage, the storyline instead revolved around the persecution of superheroes. If the president ran on a platform of villainizing people he deemed other,
they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Then there would be a poetic justice in turning him into something similar. Both literally and figuratively, it would force Ross to realize he was creating the danger all along. Additionally, it would do an excellent job setting the stage for the MCU's X-Men. Now, even if they were dead set on focusing on rage as a character trait, the line still doesn't make any sense. Instead of what they have now, the bad guy should have said,
Ross turned me into a monster.
But I'm going to show the world that he was one all along. That way, he would be destroying his legacy by revealing the truth about Ross, not changing Ross to destroy his legacy. Speaking of Ross, let's look at the resolution of his conflict and character arc. Now, the movie constantly tells us that his journey is about trying to change.
I know Ross will never change.
She doesn't believe I've changed.
You know he'll never change.
I'm trying to change.
I think you're trying to change.
But the movie rarely shows him trying to change. And even when they do, it's not emotionally impactful for two main reasons. First of all, it doesn't seem like he's struggling to make good choices. He's the one who suggests rebuilding the Avengers,
Which is why I want you to help me rebuild the Avengers.
And it's his idea to share adamantium equally with other countries. A good way to show his struggle to change would be having more moments of doubt and paranoia. If it was difficult for him to let down his guard and trust others, it would make it more impactful when he ultimately succeeds. But that change seems to have taken place in the past.
Why the change of heart? I represent all Americans now.
His character development happened before the movie even began, so his character arc has nowhere to go. The second issue is that we don't see other characters struggling to accept the fact that he's changed. Ross tells the audience that Betty doesn't believe he can change.
Betty never forgave me for sending the army after Banner.
But Betty is the one who reaches out to him later in the movie, and she immediately agrees to reconnect.
Maybe we could take a walk.
That could be nice.
Ross doesn't have to earn Betty's forgiveness, so that entire subplot feels pretty pointless. One could argue that the movie is trying to say that he needed to prove he could change to himself rather than to Betty. But if that's the case, we needed to see him struggle more on his own, and Betty should have been the one to talk him down in the finale. But instead, Sam's the one that talks Ross down, which doesn't have any emotional impact. Speaking of which, Sam does push back against Ross throughout the movie, but it never meaningfully enhances Ross's character arc. The first time they butt heads is when Ross refuses to let Sam investigate Isaiah Bradley's attack at the White House, but his reasoning is pretty legitimate.
Don't you think you're a little too close to this? Captain America conducts a personal investigation of a friend?
This isn't a sign that he's not willing to change, he just doesn't want the symbol of America to be tarnished and perceived as corrupt.
Was taking money from the pharmaceutical industry too. I think they gave you $100 million. But he can't be bought.
If the world doesn't trust the new Captain America, how is he supposed to rebuild the Avengers? And sure, Ross takes back his promise to work with Sam, but only because he has to prioritize a treaty that might prevent conflict on a global scale. The other time the two come into conflict is right before the attack on Celestial Island. Ross wants to claim the adamantium before Japan does.
If only one country is going to control adamantium, it's going to be us.
And Sam wants him to de-escalate the conflict.
He's pitting you and Japan against each other to ensure that this moment happens.
Now, this actually does a decent job at connecting to Ross's character arc. As previous movies have established, Ross wants to do what's best for the people he cares about, but he's too stubborn to change his tactics once he makes up his mind. Not listening to Sam's warning is a great way to show the audience that he's having a hard time changing. So what's the problem? Well, Ross shouldn't actually change for the better at this point in the narrative. When Sam tells him,
When showing there's more to you, it's not about when times are easy. It's about moments like this.
Ross takes it to heart and agrees to send out Sam rather than escalating the conflict. But if that happens here, what's the point of the rest of the movie? He's already proven he's able to change. This Celestial Island sequence should have been the finale. If the screenplay really wanted to include a lackluster fight with Red Hulk, this is how they should have changed this sequence. Instead of listening to Sam, Ross should have stayed committed to fighting the Japanese Navy. But before he can give the order to attack, he's overwhelmed by rage and is incapacitated trying to stop himself from hulking out. In his absence, the military looks to Captain America for direction, giving Sam the opportunity to save the day without escalating the conflict. Then, when the news interviews Sam to find out what happened, he can give credit to Ross, saying that it was his cool head that allowed them to prevent World War III. That way, Ross still has room to grow in the finale, and Brainiac's plan doesn't look so dumb. In the current screenplay, he just looks like an idiot for not anticipating Ross's change of heart. But if Sam gives the orders instead of the president, it would be a variable that the bad guy couldn't anticipate. Now, speaking of the Japanese Navy, the way the screenplay handles the Japanese ambassador is kind of baffling. First of all, Ozaki is a peak example of making a character dumb because they couldn't make the villain intelligent.
If I'd stolen the sample, why would I order Captain America to retrieve it?
At first, it felt like the movie was going to reveal that Ozaki knew that he was being played and was just looking for an excuse to go to war. But no, that would actually be an interesting complication in a quote-unquote political thriller.
I'm a fool to negotiate with someone so naive they don't realize they're being played.
Additionally, the way they try to tie this into Ross's character arc is poorly executed. Ozaki tells Ross,
Diplomacy must be hard for you. A man in a country so used to taking whatever he wants
by force.
Which is meant to imply that Ross is still the same person he used to be. But then, why bring up his country? Why not just say, diplomacy must be hard for you, a man so used to taking whatever he wants by force? That way, Ozaki would be implying that he is familiar with Ross's past and doesn't think he's capable of change. Ross would then feel called out on a personal level rather than on behalf of his country. Speaking of which, there are plenty of countries that can call out American imperialism, but it feels a bit hypocritical coming from Japan. After all, they are directly responsible for ending American isolationism. Now, the last person who has conflict with Thunderbolt Ross is Isaiah Bradley, and at least initially, this was handled excellently. When Sam tells Isaiah that he's working with President Ross, Isaiah is incredibly disappointed.
It just doesn't sit right with me. Captain America, answering to the president.
And after everything Isaiah has been through,
Bradley was in prison for rescuing his own men, experimented on for 30 years.
The audience completely understands.
The things done to him are enough to make anyone snap.
His moments of emotion are one of the few that actually feel human throughout the entire runtime.
I can't go back inside, Sam. Watch my suit.
And this makes us legitimately question if Ross is capable of growth. Unfortunately, there are two problems with Isaiah's implementation in this movie. First of all, he never actually confronts President Ross. His beef with Thaddeus is the only one that the audience is emotionally invested in, but we never get to see it come to a head. Secondly, Ross isn't even the one who gets him out of jail. Ross makes the point to say,
I represent all Americans now.
But if the audience is going to believe that, Ross needs to make things up to Isaiah directly. Just asking about him in the finale,
Bradley got out.
Yes, sir.
That's good.
doesn't absolve him of his wrongdoing. Ironically, the last thing I want to talk about is Captain America himself. Despite what the title of this movie would suggest, this movie is not about Sam Wilson. His character is featured prominently throughout the runtime, but the narrative of this movie is not about him. He does not undergo a meaningful arc or meaningfully affect change in the people around him. And what makes this so tragic is that Sam's final scene reveals how good this movie could have actually been. When Joaquin finally wakes up,
the Falcon awakens.
Sam opens up to him about all the pressure he faces on a regular basis.
I feel like I let down everyone else who was fighting for a seat at that table. That's pressure, man.
The burden of being a black Captain America and all that entails is incredibly compelling. After all, it's what made Falcon and the Winter Soldier pretty good, despite a weak villain and awkward pacing. But aside from this scene and Sam's conversation with Bucky, we never actually explore this struggle in a meaningful way. Unlike in the Disney Plus show, Sam's internal struggle isn't interwoven with the external conflict. The show wants to touch on his racial identity briefly, but simultaneously ignores it for 90% of the movie. I understand if Disney didn't want to make the movie about race, but then don't bring it up at all. And if you're going to discuss it, do so consistently throughout the movie. Have Sam constantly wondering how to best advocate for Black Americans while also representing all Americans. Have him feel like being a national symbol prevents him from being able to help the people closest to him. He can still choose to do the right thing in the end, just like Steve Rogers always did, but you have to show the audience that it's a struggle. You can't just say it is in the downtime between action sequences. Overall, Brave New World is guilty of all the things MCU haters like to mock about the franchise. It is soulless. It does feel like a toy commercial. The writing is juvenile. And when projects like this come out and fail at basic storytelling, it winds up hurting the performance of projects that deserve more attention. Is Thunderbolt's groundbreaking cinema? No, but it is well written, driven by character, and above all else, incredibly earnest. You feel emotions watching that movie, so you don't need characters talking directly to the audience. And when a movie doesn't constantly talk down to its audience, wouldn't you know, people are more likely to enjoy it. I hope they're telling us the truth when they say that the MCU is getting back on track, but if you want audiences to believe you, you have to show us that you've changed. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.